So first, specifically with your experience, like in your one-on-ones, like what's important to you both when you're talking with each other? Where do you find there's tension between the CEO and head of engineering when you're talking to each other about priorities? Like, I guess, Andrew, where's your main focus of anxiety? Tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, I actually I say this to Eli all the time. I think I'm probably the biggest pain in the butt to work for in this role, or in exchange, like at least I'll be empathetic about it, right? Like in the sense that like I do have all the isms of like things that I think are important to the business that I might be critiqueful about and really want information about. Um, and and then furthermore, like I know the things that Eli's been through, and I can probably intuit all the things that are actually happening down there, which I may not be ecstatic about either, right? Like that, like I can see some things happen, which actually makes me in some ways a more dangerous CEO because I can potentially see through some of these things. In exchange, though, like I'm also a bit more empathetic because I have been chased down the hallway before. I have been barked down in these things, and I try really hard not to do those things. Doesn't mean I'm effective doing that, but I try really hard to not do those things. Um, and so I try to caveat it, being like, look, here's my actual business concern. I traditionally might have said this thing, but I'm trying hard to say it this way. But anyway you slice it, I need this from you, and we can talk about the different ways to do it. But I need this, right? Or I'm watching this happen. Like I'm at least highlighting it, and I'm separating it from my priority versus the thing that I think you should. My instinct on that part. I'm trying to be more empathetic about it, but unclear if successful. But like that's the balance I try to attack on this thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll just say I've told you this before too, but successful, and I'm not just saying that qualitatively. Having worked for other CEOs who are not engineering minded themselves, there is much more of the just speaking a wholly different language or having assumptions coming from you know Mars about how something should be that adds like just a level of stress and difficulty on top of everything. So I will say, Andrew, like our one-on-ones, I think are the most like just it's not that there's never stuff to work through. There are sometimes definitely, um, but generally when there is, we can just like have a direct conversation about what the thing is and what we're trying to do. And the fact that you are playing CEO translator to yourself on those things, I think actually does make a tremendously big difference.
The mental narrative in that moment, like the internal argument in your head, Andrew, might be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add one more though too that I'm actually cautious of, which is like this is about my role itself. I want to make sure that I'm not overly empathetic in some ways too, in the setting where I'm not actually honoring the business needs.
Hmm.
That's the thing that I actually often think through too, which is like, am I the word soft is the wrong one, but am I not? Am I being overly empathetic on that part of it, right? Which is, there's layers of this, right? There's the human aspect, there's how we interact, there's also like the role in the business and all of those things. And I try to step back and, anyways, I go through all those tumbling conflicts here, Patrick, is the punchline here, right? Like, those are all, I'm sorting through my head on those things.
So, Andrew, in your perspective, you're focused on the business concern and communicating the business priorities. And so, Eli, in that conversation, then your main areas of focus that you're trying to communicate, like when you're thinking about engineering or communicating to the CEO, what are kind of the core things that you must communicate?
Well, I mean, the specifics, of course, are different depending on what's going on and the circumstances. But generally, in the mode of growth that we're in, this is all about how are we building. How are we building the machine here that's going to get us the places that we need to go? And it tends to be less about the day to day. I would say there's very little of our one on one about like what's going on with that one project or how are we going to get that one thing done or something. I mean, maybe sometimes those things come up.
I mean, I would say that if I was hot on something, I would chase you on that. Right? Like I don't think I'd wait for the one-on-one for that if I was actually hot on.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So the one on one itself is usually a more systematic. Like, what is the process doing? How's the machine working? What are the places where it's not working well enough to get us where we need to go? And so some of that is just checking in on progress on how it's going on those things. Some of it is a good chance to share insights. Andrew obviously has a different perspective with different things that he sees from his seat than what I do, and vice versa.
I wanted to get like from both of your perspectives, like why is there an issue here? Like why is there either like a miscommunication or why is this not working when it comes to CEO coming to ask a question from the head of engineering? Where's the conflict here? Why is this an issue?
I think a big piece of it is that engineering is hard. It's complicated. There's a lot of moving parts, but it doesn't seem like it should be hard from the outside. So for somebody who doesn't know, it's very easy to fall into the mode of like, well, why don't you just do the simple thing? Or why, all I want is this simple result. Why aren't we there yet? Without empathy and understanding for how that machine works, it's like the CEO view, I would say, is all you want to know is like, how the heck are we getting to, like, why aren't we at the place where we're having lunch yet? And from an engineering leader standpoint, I'm like telling you about what's going on in the spark plugs and the carburetor of the car that's stopping the engine from doing the thing. And it's just two different tenors of conversation. Your mechanic who's like building the guts of the car for you is not necessarily well equipped to have the conversation about, where are we stopping for lunch and why aren't we there yet?
I mean, I'll agree and build on it. I mean, I think the at the root of it, neither party understands each other's stuff, right? So traditionally, I think I'll just say CEOs and the business, as Eli's illustrated, like is ill-equipped to understand because they didn't come up and they don't think of the complexities of this stuff and um, around like why or how this works, right? And so and then reciprocally, I think a lot of engineering leaders like, look, we spent a decade, 15 years coding, right? Like, and so like you actually don't have a lot of view of actually what the business pressure is. I mean, you might know like at a surface level, but they don't connect in. And so you have both parties not understanding each other. So like in some ways, somebody has to empathize with somebody, right? Is the root of it, right? Someone has to translate across the boundary. Someone has to speak in the other person's language. Ideally, both can do it, but I think that's the challenge. Like since we're talking about engineering, I think for good or bad, like yes, I hope in a world in the future where more CEOs come from engineering backgrounds, so we actually like have people, everyone comes up with more of a technical training, so like it's not as like divorced. Like I think we're seeing some of that now too. If you look at the curriculum of schools, or everyone's doing some level of actually software engineering along the pathway. But like the reality is, I think the way the industry is oriented, the expectation is the leader of the function is supposed to be the person that bridges to the business, right? And so like I actually think this is fundamentally the transition that happens from like, hey, you're kind of like managing the code and the function to all of a sudden like, no, you're now a leader and executive, which is you have to represent that function to the business. Like in some ways it's the job of the head of engineering to connect it to the business, right? That's what it means to be the leader of the executive at a certain scale. I don't mean to minimize it, but a professional translator, right? In that sense. And I think that is like what I think people forget the job is, right? They don't realize at scale that is the job, right? Because, and that's such like, when you're leading 10 people, it might actually be like, oh, you're playing part-time architect, part-time QA person, part-time, SQL, admin, right? Like, and then all of a sudden it's like whammy, like you push up and you're 50 or 100 engineers, like your job ain't any of those things anymore. Your job is like, this is cheesy, but it's to be an executive. It's to actually, which doesn't mean you're like, flying on planes in business class. It actually means your job is professional translator, right? And making sure the business goals are met in the language of engineering, right? So I think it's like for good or bad, the onus goes to the function head to actually do that, and that's what the way the world's crafted in this way.
Eli, you've been nodding your head a lot. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I mostly am agreeing with what Andrew said. And I think that there is a long tradition in tech companies of CEOs often coming from a background in, sales or finance. They probably went to business school. And maybe they learned some tech stuff on the side, but if they did, it's probably enough to be dangerous where they think they understand it, but they have never really done it. Certainly not, at scale or in a group thing. I think there's a lot of failure modes that can happen where if you have engineering leader or leaders who are very inward looking and technologically oriented and expecting a CEO or someone above to do a level of translation of that stuff, I think you wind up with all sorts of badness.